Thank you, everyone, for coming. I am Jessica Romney. I'm Assistant Professor of Classics in the Department of Humanities at MacEwan University, which is in a very snowy and a very cold Edmonton, Alberta. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the organizers, and especially to Natalie for inviting me. Kitchen reception. I owe this phrase to Natalie. I think it's a fantastic one for looking at the different ways that ancient food is brought into the modern home and kitchen. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to chat a bit about where we see these ancient food recipes show up. There is a handout that I've just put into the chat. You should be able to access it. That has links to everything that I'm going to be talking about, and then some additional resources. So I'm going to talk about where we see these ancient recipes, why there's this interest in food, and sort of the merits of bringing it into the classroom. And I'm going to end this second section by talking a bit about how I have brought food into the classroom and sort of thoughts on moving forward from there. And then we will end with the shop part of the workshop, where I will put you all into breakout groups, and you'll discuss sort of some of the different ways that you think you could bring these recipes into your classes and engage students from something that is one of the few universals out there and everybody eats. Okay, so to get going then, in episode 1 of season 13 of Top Chef, Chef Jason Stratton presented a dish of poached heirloom chicken with salsa Apicius. That's the little green stuff on the plate there. And he introduced this dish to the judges with the note that the sauce comes from the world's oldest cookbook. A casual Amazon search shows that more people are interested in Apicius than just Chef Stratton. There are several cookbook translations, some quite recent, some that are reprints that came out a couple decades ago. In addition to Apicius, there are numerous cookbooks in English, as well as other languages, featuring ancient Greek and Roman recipes. And we can even branch out further from there. Botero's work means that you can have your very own introduction to Mesopotamian cuisine, and there are also now cookbooks on ancient Egyptian food. If cookbooks aren't your thing, there are numerous blog posts on ancient recipes, including those by PBS Nova, the British Museums, and then more popular blogs such as Delishably and Ruminate. And it's not just food. The recreation of ancient drinks, alcoholic or otherwise, has been equally popular. My colleague Matt Gibbs has worked with Barnhammer Brewery in Winnipeg, Manitoba, to recreate Roman beer as well as Mulsum. While at the 2018 meeting of the Classical Association of Canada, there was a tasting event featuring ancient beer, wine, kukeon, and barley water. And if, like me, you were fortunate enough to be late, they were all gone. It was a very popular event. In February, you can own your very own classical myth-inspired cocktail cookbook. And one of the authors of the cookbook, Liv Albert, is also the host of a very popular mythology podcast. When we move into YouTube, the how-to recipe videos that have been popularized by companies like Tasty and BuzzFeed also show up here with our ancient Greek and Roman recipes. Vox has done a recipe on how to make yummy ancient Roman fish sauce, aka garum, and they use the traditional recipe where you ferment the guts for 6 months. Nutty History has what fast food was like in ancient Rome, and Sand Roman has discussed the merits of garum, fool's bread, and moretum. The two bottom images are from Invicta's How They Did It playlist, which includes a video on fast food in ancient Rome, and then one on whether or not you can make a hamburger in ancient Rome. And they also have those on the soldiers and just regular people in Rome. For more substantial playlists, the History Channel has a YouTube series called Ancient Recipes with Sola. Ancient is very broad here, but she recreates ancient, medieval, and early modern recipes from around the world. So in the video that the screenshot there is from, it is how to make pizza on a shield like a Persian soldier, which is one of the earliest evidences for pizza that we have. The channel The World That Was has discrete playlists for Mesopotamian, Greek, and Iranian or Persian recipes, such as the Akkadian barley porridge that's on the screen. While the Ancient Greece channel has a playlist for ancient Greek food. This channel includes the always contentious recipe of baked fish with cheese. And one of my favorite moments from season 13 Top Chef was when that same chef Stratton cooked seafood with cheese following an ancient Sicilian recipe and was harangued by the judges for daring to cook such a travesty. So it's been contentious for centuries. So these are sort of standalone playlists within a larger generic sort of YouTube series. For food-related playlists, we have historical Italian cooking, which includes recipes from ancient Greece and the Byzantine Empire, such as the recipe for kandalos, which is beef or it's meat stew, and then Roman recipes as well. So there's a Saturnalia roast featured on the screen. In addition to their YouTube channel, they have a blog, a Patreon site, and several cookbooks. Tasting History with Max Miller, will end this sort of quick review, has a playlist featuring ancient Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian recipes. And he also has a recipe on Egyptian bread to sort of round out the series. So you can make black broth, as well as tufu, which is a Babylonian stew. And then he includes a quick recipe for garum that does not involve fermenting the guts, but instead boiling fish. So you have your options. Now, these videos range from 5 to 15 minutes. They include discussions of the recipes, ingredients, how you would translate these ancient techniques to a modern kitchen. So in Miller's discussion of how to make garum, he points out that if you live in a condo, using the traditional recipes probably not a great idea because your neighbors are probably going to call the cops on you because it smells like a dead body. So those considerations are important. They also discuss how to matters of translation. So in the kandalos stew, right, the recipe just says kreos, which just means meat. And the host of the series goes through different options, as well as how you might choose between the different types of meat that kreos can refer to. There are a range of cooking techniques as well. Max Miller's recipes are demonstrated on the ubiquitous hot pot of the cooking how-to video, while the videos for historical Italian cooking tend to use outdoor fire pit cooking techniques. We also get sort of comparisons of what ancient foods like cheeses would be today, and how to get as close as possible. And then there's varying levels of historical background that are given. Invicta and Max Miller have sort of the heaviest amount. And Max Miller goes for the sort of sassy historical recap style that has become very popular over the past few years. So these videos are popular. There's a large interest right now in food, eaten, how food in the past was made, right? We can still ride that pandemic sourdough craze. But the fact that these videos are available on YouTube means that they are a really easy to access teaching resource. So we're going to get into the why food portion here. And I should just say, I forgot to say this at the beginning too. If you have any questions, please do pop them into the chat or just use the raise hand function. I'll take questions at the end, but if something comes up in the middle, just stop me. I'm happy to answer them as we go. Okay, so everyone eats. Food is one of the few human universals. And in this fact, food, though it is commonly paired with drink, is a little bit different than drinks. And that is because water is the only liquid that is biologically necessary. And this means that the choice of what to drink has a far higher sociocultural connotation than it does a biophysical. But food, on the other hand, does not have that distinction because calories are calories and we need them. Now, there are better calories than others, but at the end of the day, the body doesn't really care, right? It just eats food. So because of this, we see instances where biophysical considerations can outweigh the sociocultural connotations that food conveys. But due to the omnivore's dilemma, right, the fact that since we can eat everything or almost everything, we then have to choose what to eat. Because of this, the sociocultural connotations of food can themselves outweigh the biophysical. And for an example of that, right, Odysseus's men in the Odyssey, they're not going to eat all of the fish that are in the sea because fish are marked as a not food for Homer's heroes. So instead, they eat the cattle of the sun, which of course gets them into all sorts of trouble. So ideally, food balances or food choices within a society balance these two aspects, the biophysical and the sociocultural, but they can outweigh one another. And that tends to be when bad things happen and things get really interesting. So the term foodways has been coined to refer to the practices, beliefs, and traditions around the production and consumption of food. So the definition has there, it doesn't just involve what you eat, but how it is produced, preserved, prepared, presented, who eats it, when is it consumed, both during the day, during the week, during the year, how is it accessed, and then all of the other traditions that accumulate around food in a particular society. And it's this breadth of material involved with foodways and the fact that food is immediately relatable because we all have to eat. It's these two things that make food a great way to bring students into classics and the study of the ancient Mediterranean. Studying ancient food and drink involves a range of evidence. So just on the page, we have frescoes, we have carbonized food remains. In addition to that, we have textual discussions of food consumed, how it is consumed, why people consume food. We have recipes, we have remains of cookware, serving utensils, eating utensils. So we have a full range of material. When we start talking about things like food production and food preparation, we have to, by necessity, bring in the entirety of the population. We have to talk about who produces the food. So the farmers, the landless workers, the slaves, to talk about who is processing food. So women, slaves, children. All of these things come into discussions of how food is grown, accessed, and ingested. So if we're looking to get away from sort of the traditional focus on citizen, and especially elite citizen men, food's a really good way to do it. So you can kind of go anywhere with food. And I'm going to run through sort of a quick jumping off point for food in relation to ancient Greece. And we're going to do it by taking a look at something that's ubiquitous in my part of the world, and that is grain. So wheat and barley, and then if you're up in the regions around Thrace, and around the Black Sea, the ancient Greeks had access to rye as well. So when we look at agriculture, we're looking at a sedentary population because grain-based agriculture requires people to stay put. So sedentism likely grew out of agriculture and not vice versa. In ancient Greece, we have a 2 or 3 field fallow system. And when you're managing multiple fields, you are also managing things like land ownership. And when we get into the consequences of land ownership, we also have inheritance concerns, which makes things like marriage and female chastity a big deal. And we can cue Hesiod's griping. In addition to land ownership and fields, wheat, or actually any cereal agriculture, requires storage facilities. Unlike vegetables and some fruits, you get your wheat crop all at once. You can't spread it out, even if you are growing several crops in a single year. So you need storage facilities to hold your crop, to preserve it against a bad harvest, and for seeds. Right? There's no seed company you can go to. Storage means more buildings, more infrastructure, but it also allows the taxman to efficiently assess how much you owe them. And so with wheat, we start seeing taxes and economies based on wheat yields. Right? This is how the Athenians assessed property, was how much wheat could you produce, because wheat yields are very easy to sort of estimate. And when we look at who is eating the food, right, we're looking at the oikos. And this, I think, is really interesting for how the Greeks are defining family in the archaic and early classical period. It's the mouths that eat the wheat. Right? It's the family, it's the slaves that they own, possibly any landless workers that are around them, and then the animals that are needed for producing that wheat that they eat. When we look at tending grain fields, right? So putting wheat in the ground requires plowing. If it's without animals, you need a lot of hands. So everyone who can hold a hoe is helping. If you've got oxen, it's mostly going to be adult men, simply because ox are big. As an example, I'm 5'6". I have no problem holding down a horse to keep it from rearing. I could not do that with an ox. Right? So ox have different bodily requirements for handling than horses do. So men are out in the fields, handling the oxen, putting the wheat in the ground. Once it's in, they're managing the water. If you've got a spring crop, you're looking at about 1 inch of water a week. Most crops in Greece seem to have been winter wheat, so that requires less wheat or water, which is good. You're then looking at managing any invasive weeds, checking for disease, because you can't really treat diseases that wheat gets, so you have to just pull out the plants. You're also tending the animals, you're tending the tools that you're then going to need to harvest it. Again, this is a lot of labor-intensive work that tends to get allocated to the adult men in the oikos, whether they're free or slaves. And comparative material from around the world tells us that this is normal, that adult men or teenagers as well tend to be out in the grain fields, whereas women and smaller children tend to garden. Because remember, Greeks love vegetables. So we have gardening going on that tends to be done around the house by women and children. This does change, however, when we get to the harvest season. Harvesting requirements means everybody has to chip in, because if that harvested wheat that's out in the field gets rained on before it's threshed, the wheat is ruined. You need a threshing floor, you need the equipment, and it is a very labor-intensive period of the year. So again, you have the free adults, the adult slaves, and then children as well participating. So what this means is that the relationship between free family members and slaves on a Greek farm growing wheat is going to be very different from a Roman latifunda, from the relationship between a family in the city with their slaves, or even with what's most students come to our classes knowing about slavery, and that is slavery in the American South. Okay, for processing, I'm going to quickly stop sharing my screen here. Okay, so for processing the grain, this is where things get a bit more. So you can cook grain into porridge. It takes about 20 minutes to do that in an Instapot. So do your calculations for not using a pressure cooker. Or you can grind it into flour. Now, until the invention of the millstone, everyone ground it using sort of a mortar and pestle. And then even after the millstone, if you didn't have easy access to one or didn't want to pay the miller, you then continued mortar and pestle. So I made the recipe for hapa las artas, which is from historical Italian cooking when they got it from Apicius. It makes 3 loaves about this size, so they're cut handheld. You might get them a bit bigger if you are not in northern Alberta, where it's -20. It's a slower rise here right now, but they don't get that big, right? So they're about a hand size. For those 3 loaves, you need 300 grams of flour, which is about 2 cups. So it's about like a small soup bowl. Now, if you did not have access to someone who has pre-made your flour for you, you'd be grinding it. Now, remember, the adult men are out tangling with oxen. So that leaves the women, indoor slaves, and children. So I've got about just under a quarter cup of grain here. I'm going to keep talking, and you might hear some mashing, so I'm going to be mortar and pestling it. So the grain is hard, right? It's especially if you're doing winter wheat. So you're spending a lot of time grinding. While I do this, I'm going to bring the screen back up. So as you are grinding your grain, you're doing this for 2 or 3 meals for everyone in the family. Now, that little handheld loaf would feed 1 person. So you've got 3 loaves, 3 people, maybe 3 loaves for 2 people, depending on how much labor the adult men are doing. So you're looking at, maybe 600, 900 grams of flour a day. And as you grind, you then are also thinking about the cooking. The most common leavening agent was a piece of bread from the previous day. So we're looking at daily bakes. These are slow rises overnight or throughout the course of the day. And this is just for the staple. Right? This doesn't include making the relishes for the opsa. It doesn't include cooking lentils or legumes for protein. It doesn't include making cheese from any dairy products you might have. It does not include preserving any meat products you might have. Or if you have grapes on your property, it also does not include preserving those either by drying or by turning into wine. So a good portion of the day for anyone who is not out in the field is spent grinding grain and producing bread or porridge. So the consequences of this are that families have to decide where the work hours are allocated. If a portion of the family is spending the majority of their hours outside in the field, it also means that they don't have the time of the day to then come home and grind grain, that they need to have somebody else to do it for them. And so in the allocating of these gender-based roles, we then see the association of specific spaces to adult women and men that then over time develop into the discourses around keeping women indoors and allowing men outdoors that grow up to justify what was originally a practical consideration to the fact that it takes a long time to grind grain and also to grow it. Okay, so what does this mean for our purposes? Well, grain is pervasive enough in the Greek imagination that even work songs can serve as political metaphors or commentary. So in the anonymous Carmina in the Greek lyric tradition, there is a work song from Lesbos that goes, grind, mill, grind, just as Pittacus ground while ruling great Mytilene. Pittacus is the notorious tyrant, of course, from Alcaeus's verses, but he is also one of the 7 sages of archaic Greece. And the women of Mytilene seem to have come out on Alcaeus's side. But how separate then can we say that women's involvement in politics is, or in political awareness, if they are able to make a political commentary in songs to keep time while grinding grain? Or we can look at another food. We can look at the olive. So to destroy a mature olive tree, you essentially need dynamite, which means that the Spartan adventurers in burning Athenian olive groves during the Peloponnesian War, in addition to the vines, seems to be an exercise in futility because it's not destroying the tree, and the vines actually do like a good pruning. And here, I suppose we have the BC fires to thank for this sort of connection for me. It likely wasn't the wood they were after. It was the fruit. A fruit tree can survive a traumatic event like a fire, but it may be a year or more before it's up to full production. Ditto with the vines. So if this is happening year after year after year, how long is it going to take that tree to get over the trauma of being torched every summer and start producing export-worthy or olive-worthy olives again? So it may not be that when we look at Aristophanes' Acharnians, it's not just the fact that Spartans are trooping all over their land, but that the farmers and the olive growers around Athens are seeing their profits and their livelihood go up in smoke because they know that it's going to be 3, 5, 10 years before they're able to count on their olive trees for income again. But let's look beyond practical considerations. So here at MacEwan, we have a broadly defined 200-level course titled Identity and Belonging in Antiquity. And in 2020, I structured it around food and ideas of consumption. So you've got the schedule of lectures up there on the screen. And once we got through the talking about identity portion, the course essentially progressed from the use of food to define human between animal and God, and then through to social identifiers via food or attributed appetite, political uses of food, discourses around appetite, and then we ended with ethnic groups as identified by their food choices. And instead of the biophysical considerations underlying the practical impact of food on Greek society, I focused on walking students through the sociocultural uses of food to distinguish social, political, and ethnic groups. And overall, the course went well. Students enjoyed it. We're going to ignore the pandemic cutting off the end of the term. But I do have a few thoughts I'd like to share with you. So the first change is the start of the term. And this is, I think I would spend the time here, instead of going over identity theories, talking more about how Greek and Roman diet worked. That is, what they ate, how food was produced and accessed, and what went into cooking the food. And here I've been considering bringing in something that Mary Yeager talked about in a meeting of the Classical Association of the Pacific Northwest a few years ago. But it would be something that I think would have to be post-pandemic. So she talked about how she taught in sort of an inter-college summer session course that was that revolved around Virgil's Moratum. And as part of the coursework, students made sourdough bread, and they also made farmer's cheese. And there was a big like sort of feast at the end where students shared their food. She is also, I will say, the one that I took the wheat grinding example from. And I will just show you here. I've barely made a dent on this stuff, right? And been talking for a decent amount since I started. So you can see there's some flour up at the top, but most of the grains haven't even been touched, right? So think about doing that every day for everyone's food over and over and over again. You'd probably be kneeling, so you'd have really bad knees, back problems, wrist problems. And then, you'd get to do it all over again. And the nice thing about that is nothing makes the point better that you're spending the majority of your day just physically turning raw material into something that can potentially be turned into edible food by asking students to do it themselves, right? To ask them to grind grain. And not let them cheat by using a spice grinder or coffee grinder. So I will say, however, that if you do a sort of make your own food option, coursework option, especially if some enterprising student offers to make garum. And a lot of teeth problems in the ancient world from grit and from just hard flour grains. So if you have an enterprising student who wants to make garum or anything that has the potential for food poisoning, be careful. I've heard many stories of people accidentally giving themselves, their classmates, and their friends food poisoning from making garum. So just be careful there. Use the quick and dirty method, right? Not the fermenting method. There's too many issues that can go with that. So just be careful with that, as the modern stomach doesn't handle things that we used to be able to handle. Okay, so the other thing with thinking about considerations of diet and who ate what and how they could access food is the fast food videos that Invicta and Nutty History have produced. They make the point very well that due to the size of city houses and tenements and apartments, most Romans didn't actually cook their own food. So they're in the same boat as our students in that cooking knowledge is probably not very high. Though in the case of the Romans, it's because many people just didn't have the space for a kitchen. And so they would buy their food out. So this introductory unit on the merits of food production before getting into feasting groups, food as a sociocultural marker, and then food and ethnicity, also has the merit of encouraging those of us, and I include myself in this number, who have the best intentions of bringing in non-textual material to our courses, but who often fail to meet those best of intentions when the term gets going. Right, so, in looking at food at the beginning, we can bring in all of those different sources, the recipes, as well as the ways of making food, the carbonized food, the evidence, the archaeological evidence, as well as the textual. It gives students an easier and more broad access point. And in doing this, I think it would make it easier for students to follow those more, to follow the sociocultural aspects of food. Okay, so that is sort of the end of my spiel. Before I set you off to go into your breakout groups, does anyone have questions? Again, I'm happy to take them at the end or throughout the breakout groups, but I just thought I'd. see if anyone does now. So if there are no questions, it's totally fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into breakout groups. On that Google Doc that I shared at the beginning, on the last page, there are a few guiding questions that to help you with the discussion, though you can't ignore them if you want to talk about something else. Basically, this is a time to think about how kitchen reception can be brought into service courses in particular to lure students into the wonderful world of classics. How we can use food and drink to offer meaningful connections to the ancient Mediterranean, while also conveying the historical, mythological, literary content of those courses. It may also be a chance to think about connections we can make with other disciplines. Anthropology and food studies are the immediate go-tos, but there are others. Or even how we might use recipes or food in language classes and upper level courses as a topic, a methodology, or anything else. So we've got about 20 minutes. So I'll give you about 10 minutes, and then we'll sort of share some ideas at the end. I'll take notes on the Google Doc so that you'll have access to it afterwards. The Google Doc is for you to use after this and to share as you see fit. So if you want to take notes on it as well, feel free. Okay, looks like we are all back. I hope we're able to get some good discussion going. We chatted about ways to do one-off lectures and other sorts of considerations with food. I did put the link to the recipe for the bread in the Google Doc if you want to try making it. It's really easy. But in these last few minutes, are there any questions or is there anything that y'all chatted about that you'd like to share with everyone else?
Well, we had a good long conversation about sweeteners that was sparked by something that Laura does in her class for her students, making these sesame honey treats, and kind of trying to think about like what would be any other sources of a sweetener that, you know, like the Romans might have had, people in Italy might have had access to. So we just hypothesized about that for a while.
Yeah, nice. It's yeah, honey, lots and lots of honey.
Yeah, we actually got off track and talked about a lot of other things instead, but I did think of something. I'm reading class evaluations for another faculty person for reviews, and his students were really excited that he had them in a session where they all had to bring in a food that related to, he was teaching English literature. And so the books that they were reading, they had to find foods that, you know, made sense with that to feed to their classmates when it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, one more thing that COVID has ruined for all of us. Yeah, like exercises like that are great because, you know, particularly if you've got students whose families are Greek or Italian or from any of the areas that we talk about in our courses, because it gives them a chance to like have a bit of a personal connection to the course material too, and then, you know, share a bit of themselves with their classmates in a really low stakes kind of fashion. I usually do a sort of symposium at the end of term for my Greek students. Though they're always very disappointed that I don't let them play Kottabos. But it's a nice way to end the term. And to do it through it also is fun. Any other questions? Okay, well, I guess it's the point where we all get to leave and go start eating food. instead of just talking about it. So thank you all again for coming, for having me. And again, use the handout as you see fit. Feel free to share it. It's a resource for you all to use. And happy holidays. And if you're not done grading, good luck and happy grading. Thank you.